the Romantic poets who precede the Victorian poets. Now, they are quite different from the Victorians in the sense when you read the poetry of Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, you found that they were mostly preoccupied with this, the portrayal of nature primarily. And Wordsworth, of course, as you know, he is called the poet of nature as such. And however, when you come to the Victorians, you will find that they were, some of them, of course, were interested in nature, of course, but they were more fascinated by human nature rather than nature as such. And you find this in the poetry of Robert Browning particularly. And actually what happens in his poems, you will find that in his poems you will find that there is a kind of a psychological analysis which is found in his poems, and especially in his dramatic monologues. Now, I will, of course, explain what a dramatic monologue is. My Last Duchess, the poem that we are going to study, that is, of course, it is a dramatic monologue, and it is quite a famous dramatic monologue as such. Robert Browning, he in most of his poems, you will find that he took up a particular character, a particular individual, and he let him talk and reveal his mind to the readers. Now, Browning is famous for his dramatic monologues, and you, of course, you perhaps are aware of the characteristics of the dramatic monologue. I will just mention 2 or 3 characteristics here. You will find that a dramatic monologue is a kind of a poem where you will find that there is a single speaker, and basically what happens in a dramatic monologue is the speaker is allowed to talk, and he is allowed to address the listeners. Now, there might be more than one listener, or there might be just one listener. As in this particular poem, My Last Duchess, there is a single listener. But in other poems, there might be more than one listener. Now, in a dramatic monologue, you will find that it begins all of a sudden, and the speaker, he is talking about something, an incident or something about someone, which would take us back to the past. In a sense, we will be able to look at what happened in the past. By listening to the words of the speaker, we will be able to look at or understand what had happened immediately before or sometime before. And therefore, it would be possible for us to, in a way, construct the sequence of events as it unfolds before us. And in a poem like a dramatic monologue, you will find that the listener is not allowed to speak out. He or she would not be allowed to speak out, but he or she would be listening. He or she would be a passive listener. Uh, he or she would be allowed to make facial gestures or bodily gestures. That is allowed, but he would be a listener. He would not be able to or allowed to talk or express his opinion orally, so to speak. And as you can see here in this poem, like in most of the poems by Robert Browning, and Robert Browning was really famous for his poems, that is his dramatic monologues. And he came to write quite a few of these poems, and some of his important dramatic monologues really, they present very eccentric characters. For example, here in this particular poem, you will find that the speaker is a duke, the Duke of Ferrara, who is actually based on a historical figure, and that is Duke Alfonso II of the Este family, of the house of Ferrara during the Italian Renaissance in the 16th century. And Browning had spent a lot of time in Italy, and he, in most of his poems, he had taken up characters who belong to Italy. Now, in a dramatic monologue, you will find that the entire poem is spoken out at a kind of a critical moment of the speaker's life. And Browning actually, is regarded as one of the masters of this form of this genre of poems. That is the dramatic monologue. Actually, he had written a few plays before he took up poetry, and he became famous as a great Victorian poet. But he had certain plays to his credit, which were, however, not really critically acclaimed as such. But he had this dramatic element in him. And in the dramatic monologue, as you can understand from the title itself, there has to be this dramatic quality in that poem. So a kind of a thing that would begin all of a sudden in medias res, as it is called in Latin, that is in the middle of things, just as the epic would begin in that way. And you will find that in poems, the famous dramatic monologues like Fra Lippo Lippi, Andrea del Sarto, Rabbi Ben Ezra, The Last Ride Together, this particular poem, so all reveal Browning's talent and how he, in these poems, he takes up a particular character and he makes that character talk, and in the process that character would reveal his motives, his objectives, and the readers would understand what type of a person he is. So this particular poem, My Last Duchess, that is of course another example of Browning's masterful use of the dramatic monologue. Now I would go on to the poem itself, and I would share the poem with you, and let us look at the poem. So this is the poem, My Last Duchess. And this poem actually, as I told you, this poem is a dramatic monologue that is spoken by a single speaker. And here you will find that that speaker is the Duke of Ferrara, and his name is Duke Alfonso II. Duke Alfonso II, Alfonso, and he is a person who is seeking a bride. In a sense, he would like to remarry, and he is receiving a messenger. He is receiving a messenger from the Duke of Tyrol, and he is talking with him. And I would tell you about this poem. This was published in the collection called Bells and Pomegranates under dramatic lyrics, and the first title that it had was Italy, and the year was 1842 when it was first published. So this is the history, but later on this poem was included in the collection of poems called Dramatic Romances, which was published in 1868. And as I have told you, this Duke of Ferrara, actually Ferrara is a well-fortified city in the lower Lombardy region of Italy, and it was held by the Este family, Este, and from the 13th to the 16th century. And it seems that, as I told you, Browning has taken for his model of the Duke this Alfonso II, who was the 5th Duke of Ferrara. And the Duke actually is referring to the portrait of his first wife. And we know one historical fact, and that is his first wife had been poisoned, and she was a young woman of 17 years old, and her name was Lucrezia de Medici. But her house or her family was not as old as that of the Duke, and you will find this to be a kind of a reference point when the Duke would refer to his 900-year-old name. So let us read this poem. Let us start reading this poem. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. So the poem opens with a kind of an reference, or with the Duke pointing to a woman's portrait on the wall. And this woman he introduces as his previous Duchess. And while pointing out this picture to the the messenger who has come for a marriage negotiation with him, he sort of, as we can understand, he takes this messenger upstairs to his gallery, and he talks to him in a very intimate manner with the company assembled below who are waiting downstairs. And this gives him the opportunity of talking to him in an intimate way, and this also gives him the opportunity to soften him up so that his case for a larger dowry can be represented before the count, who is the master of this messenger and whose daughter he is going to marry shortly. Now, so he says, "That's my last Duchess painted on the wall." You can see how the letter S is predominant in this first line of the poem, a kind of a sibilant hissing sound, and it is resembling a kind of a serpent, as if the way the Duke is describing, or he is pointing to the portrait of the last Duchess. So it is a kind of a way in which Browning is referring to the evil nature of the Duke, looking as if she were alive. So she is no longer alive, but the Duke says that as if she is living. So the cynical, matter-of-fact way in which the Duke introduces, or the Duke points out the picture of his last Duchess to the messenger is to be noted. I call that piece a wonder now. I call that piece a wonder. Wonder, of course, here means a wonderful piece of work, a wonderful piece of painting. And he is saying that this portrait is so lifelike. It seems as if the Duchess is still alive. The lifelike quality of the portrait, that is what he is pointing out to the messenger. And he goes on to appreciate it as a wonderful piece of art and commends the artistry of the painter. Now, who is the painter? Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. So Fra Pandolf. Fra is this is a kind of a title for a friar or a monk. In those days, you know, these aristocratic families, they employed the monks from the monasteries to come and paint the portraits of the people. And in this case, it is Fra Pandolf. Now, this name is a fictitious name. There was no one called Fra Pandolf in those days. Browning makes it up, and he makes the Duke say that it was Fra Pandolf, this famous painter who was a monk also. He painted this picture of the last Duchess in he took a full day, worked busily a day, and there she stands. So Fra Pandolf had to work for one full day before the portrait assumed its present perfection. Will it please you sit and look at her? So the Duke now requests the envoy to sit down and look at the picture. Will it please you sit and look at her? So he has something to say to the messenger. He wants him to sit down and listen to him. So as you can see, Browning here is making some dramatic, kind of dramatizing the situation by making quick digressions in the narrative, and he mentions the name of Fra Pandolf on purpose. Now let us look at the next lines. I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. So he's saying that I mentioned the name of Fra Pandolf deliberately. By making the painter a friar, Browning wanted to emphasize uh, that there was no cause for the Duke's jealousy. Now, pictured countenance is the painted face. And as I told you, Browning is dramatizing the situation. And the Duke says to the messenger that people who came to his palace, strangers like you, that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. So it is the prerogative of the Duke to put back the curtain that hides the picture of his last Duchess. No one has the authority to put back the curtain and sort of show that portrait to the strangers. And so the Duke is saying that none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. So people generally what they do, they turn to the Duke. When the Duke shows them the picture of his last Duchess, they always turn to him, and they have a kind of a question which the Duke would be able to understand. Always they are interested in knowing how that expression, that particular expression, came to the Duchess's face. And the Duke confesses to the messenger, as I have said, that no one is allowed to put back the curtain but himself. And he assures the envoy that he was not the first to question him about it. So the envoy, actually here, the envoy is not voicing forth his question, but most probably he raised his eyebrow and he made a kind of an inquiring glance. And so he perhaps was surprised to look at the expression of earnest, that ardent look, earnest glance, the ardent look. So that is what the Duke says. And seemed as they would ask me if they durst. Durst means dared. If they dared, they would ask him. How such a glance came there. So the expression on the Duchess's face, which the painter, the monk, has painted, how come there was this ardent, eager look on the face of the Duchess? So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus, Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. So here he is explaining. He says that you are not the first one to ask me this question or feel this. This question has come to your mind, and he explains that in a slightly ironical tone, the Duke tells the envoy that his Duchess's face did not flush with pleasure in his presence alone. So he was her husband, and the Duke expected that she should have smiled only at him, only in his presence, not in the presence of any other person. And that would have been a kind of a, you can say, a kind of a sacrilege. So obviously the Duke is explaining how that ardent look came into the Duchess's face. Next he says, perhaps Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. So the Duke is sort of imagining things. He is saying that maybe Fra Pandolf, while he was painting her picture, he had commented to the effect that he had said that your mantle is lapping or is covering the wrist too much. And he had asked the Duchess to uncover her wrist. And that might have embarrassed the Duchess and had brought about that ardent look on her face. Or perhaps he had commented that he had complimented her on her beauty, saying that it would not be possible for him to capture the fading blush on her throat on the canvas. So this is what the Duke is imagining. He is imagining that maybe Fra Pandolf, while he was painting the picture of the last Duchess, he was actually making such, or he had made such comments which had brought about these that particular flush, that color that had come into her face. So the faint half flush, it means the dim blush on the cheek disappearing along the throat. So this is what the Duke explains. And you can understand from his attitude that he was a jealous husband. The way he says that this particular line, "Sir, it was not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek." So that is quite clear to us. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. Maybe the Duchess was easily impressed with such courtesies and beamed with pleasure. Now, the Duke is saying that the courteous remarks made by the painter produced that feeling of pleasure in her, and that is why that faint half flush appeared. Now he is going to describe the nature of the Duchess. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. So now the Duke is going to describe her nature, and he tries to take on the attitude of a sophisticated person, an aristocratic person who is a sophisticated, cultured person. And he says that in a kind of a sarcastic way that she was so innocent. Her heart was made glad by trivial things. She was too easily impressed by trivial things. So he is emphasizing, or he is saying that the Duchess was really extremely innocent. And this quality of innocence, that was something that did not appeal to him. He had no sympathy with this quality of the Duchess's innocence, and he complains that she liked all that he saw, and he is shocked at her lack of discrimination. So being the Duchess of such an illustrious old family, she should have behaved in a different way, which she did not do. So too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. So here he's saying that her heart was susceptible to easy gladness. And this was something, the fact that the Duchess became glad very easily. She was impressed by everything she came across. That is something, according to the Duke, was something, kind of a negative quality, not a positive quality for her. And her looks went everywhere. So she was not very circumspect, or she was not very uh, discriminating in that way. And then he goes on to say, Sir, it was all one, my favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her. So he's saying, my favour at her breast. Here it means maybe some costly necklace, or some gift which the Duke had given her. So he's saying that she was wearing the ornament presented by her husband, and she was equally delighted by it as she was delighted by looking at the sunset, the dropping of the daylight. That means sunset, dropping of the daylight in the western horizon. Or if a bough of cherries was bought to her, it was brought to her by some officious fool. Some officious fool here, of course, means a servant who uh, brought such gifts to the Duchess without being asked for. She had not asked for that gift, but that servant broke off a branch of these cherries, and he brought that gift to her, and she was equally delighted by it. So you can understand how the Duke reacted. He did not like the way she valued his gift, the gift that she had got from her husband. It was of the kind of the same value as that gift of cherries brought by a servant. The white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech. So, as we can see here, the Duchess was very innocent. She was quite young, as we come to know from the records, and she used to be very glad or happy when she used to ride the white mule round the terrace, and everything would bring out of her a kind of, she would blush or express her pleasure to one and all equally. So she would not really make a kind of a difference for the gift that she had received from her husband. So that gift that she had received from her husband did not was not accorded any extra value. Uh, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. So either she would blush with pleasure, or she would thank the person in a very profuse way. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. So he's saying that yes, she thanked men. That's good. Of course, you should thank people when you receive gifts from anyone. But thanked somehow, I know not how. So just look at this this dash, it denotes the kind of how the Duke is pausing. Somehow, then he pauses for a second or two, as if he is trying to recall how she thanked the people. I know not how. Then he gives up and he says, well, I would not be able to explain it to you. And But the the fact is that she ranked his gift of a 900 years old name. So the gift that she had received from her husband, it had a kind of a history. It was really extremely expensive because it had been in the family for 900 years. So the Duke says that he came from a very illustrious and old ancient family, aristocratic family, and the Duchess was not able to differentiate between the gift the Duke gave her and the very insignificant gift of a bough of cherries that was given to her by a servant. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? So he's saying that it was below his dignity. Since he was the Duke, he held a very high position. Obviously, he did not condescend. He did not kind of bend down. He would not bend low to blame her for her expansive nature. So he was not going to go up to her and tell her that you are not behaving properly, that you should not thank that servant in the same way that you thanked me for that gift of that necklace. So the Duke was not going to do that. This trifling. So you can understand how angry the Duke had been. So he's saying this was trifling. The Duchess was really, she did not show the kind of, importance to the gift, as if she was trifling with his gift. Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. So the Duke here says that he did not know how to express his desires, how to instruct her, even had you skill in speech. So even if he had that skill in speech, he did not have that. He confesses that, and he says that he could not tell her how her behavior it disgusted him, or how she fell short of or exceeded the limits of decorum. So he's saying that uh, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me, here you miss, or there exceed the mark. So here you miss, meaning that you have not been behaving properly in that situation, or you have exceeded the mark. You have behaved in a way which did not suit you as the Duchess of such an aristocratic and ancient family. So obviously, uh, though her behavior disgusted him, he was not ready to tell her this. He was not ready to sort of rectify her, warn her in a sense. He was not going to say anything to her, and he allowed her to go on making these mistakes. So, or there exceed the mark. and if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse. So he's saying that he did not stoop, and he would not allow himself to do this on any account. And he is not sure whether the Duchess would have allowed herself to be corrected without defiance, and it would still amount to having stooped. So if she let herself be lessoned so, that is, if she had allowed the Duke to give her the correct advice, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. So he's saying that even if the Duchess had allowed him to be sort of advised, still he would have done that, because it would not have been suitable for him to stoop as the Duke of Ferrara. So as you can see here, the Duke is very kind of an authoritative, jealous. He is full of his sorry pride of his ancestry, proud of his birth, his family, and proud of his 900-year-old name. And he is also extremely cruel, and that you can understand from the way he explained everything to the ambassador. So while sort of telling the ambassador about his last Duchess, the nature of his last Duchess, he is actually exposing himself. He is exposing his own character. So that is what he is doing here. So I will stop here today, and I will continue in the next class